Hello, and welcome to the Art of Being Human. I'm going to start off by talking about the medical effects of marijuana because there are some significant things that marijuana can do in medicine that's very important. I mentioned last segment about seizure disorders, but there are a lot of other things too that marijuana can be a help for. So we are talking about medical marijuana. If for one thing, it relieves nausea, and it relieves vomiting. It's hard to give a person medication for nausea and vomiting because they're going to just vomit up the medication. But this calms things right down, so it relieves the nausea and vomiting. And another thing, there's a lot of nausea and vomiting in chemotherapy, and in that way it's a help for cancer patients. It helps ease the symptoms of the chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is a very difficult thing to go through. Usually people can get through part of it and then they start feeling really sick. And marijuana can calm that down and make them feel a whole lot better. It helps for chronic pain, and it helps glaucoma patients so that for the symptoms of upcoming blindness, it is a help for glaucoma. It helps multiple sclerosis, and for patients with multiple sclerosis, helps them to control their symptoms and feel better. And as I mentioned before in the last segment, it can stop seizures. So when you consider all of this, cancer patients, pain, nausea, vomiting, seizures, glaucoma, multiple sclerosis, marijuana has a place. It really does have a place. I know I'm much more cognizant now after having done research on it than I was before. Years ago, I used to say, no, 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 no. Now I'm saying that for medical processes, it can be very helpful for certain conditions where other medications do not work. Now, marijuana is not a narcotic or a hallucinogenic drug, but it doesn't mean you can't have hallucinations on them if you get too much of it. People do feel drunk when they take it, and they can experience hallucinations on it if they're taking it at a high dose. I'm wondering, and this is just wondering on my part, and I don't have an answer for it, that if a person is using marijuana and they're using it extensively for recreational purposes, do they realize how close they're getting to being intoxicated or in danger from the use of it? Or are they so spaced out that they can't realize when they're using too much, and as a result of that, putting themselves in danger, either by driving or having a hallucinogenic experience or something like that? So because they don't feel the same as if it was a hard drug when they're taking a hard drug. The symptoms are different. Now, I'm not saying the symptoms are safer, although people argue that they are, but you can be in danger in taking any kind of drug. People experience hallucinations, as I mentioned before. So what are the withdrawal symptoms of marijuana? It can be irritability, restlessness, insomnia, anorexia, and believe it or not, nausea. All of those things can be withdrawal symptoms from marijuana if you've had too much. Irritability, restlessness, insomnia, anorexia, which is, of course, not eating, or nausea. It is a gateway drug. It can lead to the use of more potent drugs. If a person feels that they need to be higher than what marijuana can take them, it's an easy skip to go into some other kind of a drug. And so that's also a danger of it, is the fact that it will act as a gateway drug. Now, how do people get addicted? Well, they get addicted, and I'm not talking specifically about marijuana here. I'm talking about other drugs as well. People get addicted because they try drugs out of curiosity, because they're in pain and they're trying to get rid of the pain, because they want to have some kind of affect. Some people just want to feel. and so they use drugs to do it. They want to feel differently than they already feel. They're feeling dead inside, so take something to make yourself feel better. You know, so that, excuse me, so they become addicted from that. Now, addiction does affect the brain, and I'm not specifying any particular drug here. It's just that addiction does affect the brain. And what happens to the brain? Well, to make it as simple as I can, neurotransmitters are out of balance. The neurotransmitters make sure that you get when it fires off an electron, when it fires off something, it goes from one cell to another cell to another cell to another cell. In other words, your nervous system is electric in nature, and when you fire off something or the nerve cell fires, it has to go to another cell, and then that cell has to make sure it goes to another cell, and the neurotransmitters are responsible for that. They are substances in the brain, and they must be in balance, because if they are not, your nervous system cannot function appropriately. Now, the addictions make people repeat behavior, even if they know that it's dangerous to do so. If you're addicted to a drug, and you know the drug is ruining you or could ruin you, you still want to use the drug even though you know what the consequences are. You know, maybe you've been arrested for drunk driving. Maybe your license has been taken away. What do? You go for the drug. The drug becomes more important than anything. The drug becomes your next fix. You are fixed on getting more and more of the drug. And even if you know the consequences, even though you can lose your family, even though you can lose your job, you can lose your house, you can lose your car, it doesn't matter. You're going to have the drug, because the drug is always going to become first. The cravings will be intense. Emotions will be exploited. Memories can be destroyed. Your brain cannot function normally. If you're taking an illicit drug and you're damaging yourself with it and you're going too far with it, the whole thing for me is you shouldn't be taking drugs, because if they're used for medical purposes, that's one thing. I mean, I get up every morning and I take 9 pills. That keeps my heart going. You know, with heart trouble and diabetes and all of that, I have to have my 9 pills every morning. But they're not illicit drugs. They're not going to change my behavior. They're only going to put everything in balance and have the heart beat normal, which it wouldn't be beating normally without the medications. So medical use of things is medical use of things. And if you need the help, you need the help with it. But to use it just for the sake of using it, to see how you're going to feel as an experiment, that is not a good idea. So people will repeat their behavior because they become addicted, and even though they know, excuse me, that this is not a good thing, they still will do it anyway because they want that drug. They want the feeling of being high. Now, here is a definition of addiction. Various people and various organizations have different definitions of what addiction really is. For me, my definition of addiction would be when you stop wanting it and then you cross that line into needing it. If you want it because it makes you feel good, that's one thing, but you can sometimes resist that. But then when your brain changes and starts demanding it, you go from wanting it to needing it, and that is something else, and now you are addicted. But here is the National Institute on Drug Abuse has its own definition. National Institute on Drug Abuse. If you are unable to stop when you want to, despite being aware of the adverse consequences, it permeates your life. You spend more and more time satisfying your craving. That's addiction. That's one definition of addiction. I'm going to read it again. You are unable to stop when you want to, despite being aware of the adverse consequences. It permeates your life. You spend more and more time satisfying your craving. That's from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, NIDA. So the addiction is not just about the substances. It disrupts the process of your creativity. It disrupts the process of your pleasure. You create more and more urges, and you keep wanting more and more and more. That's another definition from another doctor, Dr. Martin Polios. He's a psychiatrist, and that's his definition of addiction. I'll read that again. Addiction disrupts the process of pleasure. You create more and more urges. You keep wanting more and more. So that's another definition. According to, I almost brought my copy with me, but I didn't. There is a book, a huge thick book, it's called the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And it's used, they upgrade it every 2 or 3 years or so, and it's used to diagnose, and that also help to treat mental illnesses. Every illness, every mental illness known to man is in that book. And as the illnesses become more common, they treat it, they work with it, they diagnose it. It really is a diagnostic manual for mental illnesses. But they say, according to the DSM, there are criteria for substance abuse. Now, here's the criteria for substance abuse. Recurrent use resulting in failure to fulfill obligations, work, home, and school. Absences, poor work performance, school expulsion, and neglect of family. That is substance abuse according to the DSM, and I want to read that again. Recurrent use resulting in failure to fulfill obligations, work, home, and school. Absences, poor work performance, school expulsions, and neglect of family. Okay. Now, here's the second, that what the DSM does is it lists certain things. In this case, it lists 4 things in terms of abuse of a drug. And then if you have so many of those things, then you can be classed as a drug abuser. So what I read you was the first category that they have for drug abuse. The second one is this. This is also from the DSM. Substance abuse in situations where it becomes hazardous, such as driving or operating machinery. I'll read it. That's the second category. Substance abuse in situations where it becomes hazardous, driving or operating machinery. The third category is this. This is still under drug abuse. Substances-related legal problems, arrest, disorderly conduct. Substance-related legal problems, arrest, disorderly conduct. And the fourth category is the use causes interpersonal problems, arguments with spouses, and fights. Now, only one or more than one will class you as a drug abuser of all of these 4, and I want to just read over these 4 again. Remember, this is coming from the DSM as a book that is upgraded every so often. Most people, most psychologists and counselors use it to diagnose mental disorders, and it lists things. If you are a drug abuser, this is what you're going to do. These are the categories, and all you have to do is have one of these categories, and you can be classified as a drug abuser. So let me read the categories again. I just want you to be fully aware of what drug use entails, and this is the reason why I'm just going through this so much. Okay, the first category, recurrent use resulting in failure to fulfill obligations, work, home, school, absences, poor work performance, school expulsion, and neglect of the family. The second one, substance abuse in situations where it becomes hazardous, driving or operating machinery. The third one, substance-related legal problems such as arrest, disorderly conduct. And the fourth, use can cause interpersonal problems, arguments with spouses, and fights. So if you have even one of these categories, you are, according to the DSM, abusing drugs. But you may have more than that. Usually when they list something off, they may list 10 or 15 things for certain conditions. Like, for example, paranoia, schizophrenia, whatever the illness is, they'll list certain things. And if you have so many of those things, maybe three or more, or two or more, or five or more, whatever it is, then you can be classed with that kind of an illness. So I've read you the 4 categories in drug abuse, and all you have to do is have one, and you are a drug abuser. Well, you stop to think of it. If you've been arrested, if you're driving machinery dangerously, if you're getting into fights with people, not showing up for work, all of those things can be a result of overuse of drugs because you're concentrating only on the drugs, and it means that you're not paying attention to your professional or your family life. Now, the drug dependence, I guess I have time for this. You need to have 3 or more for drug dependence. Drug tolerance, the need for greater amounts of the drugs, the diminished effect of drugs if the same amount is taken. In other words, you need to have more and more of the drug to get the effect that you want. Withdrawal symptoms, and these withdrawal symptoms will be based upon the drugs that you take. Unusual withdrawal for a particular substance. Another drug is taken to relieve the withdrawal of a first drug that's been taken, or a drug is taken in larger doses over a long period of time. In other words, you are using drugs now in order to prevent withdrawal symptoms. You're using either more and more and more of the drug to stop withdrawal symptoms. And at this point, usually in your addiction, you want to stop, but you can't stop. Because the drug is no longer pleasurable, it is running your life. And if you don't take more and more of it, you're going to get sicker and sicker because the withdrawal symptoms are going to be worse and worse. So you need greater amounts of the drugs. And then sometimes in withdrawal, you will take another drug to help you stop the withdrawal symptoms of a first drug that you've already taken. Excuse me. Unsuccessful attempts to cut down on the control and use of drugs, much time spent getting the drug, even going to the doctors over and over and over for drugs. Social and recreational events are given up or reduced due to substance abuse. You've been invited for your friend's birthday party, you don't show up. You don't show up because you'd rather stay home and feel that you really need to use drugs instead. Continued use of the drug despite the knowledge of the problems resulting from it. So this is a progressive thing, and the DSM has nailed it. This is what you do, and this leads to a greater use of the drugs, and this means that you're going to cut out your social relationships or not show up for work because all you can think of now is to take the drug. And that's too bad, but it gets to be worse and worse and worse. And then you develop certain syndromes, that is, you develop certain symptoms that can be specific to the drug that you're taking. And I'm not going to get into that here, but there are certain drugs that have certain withdrawal symptoms that are different than other drugs. You can almost spot what the person is taking by the nature of the withdrawal symptoms that they have. So this is the DSM will give you categories. It'll talk about drug dependence. It will talk about drug overuse of drugs. It will talk about dependency. It will talk about addiction. It'll list the categories of symptoms that you have if you're in any of these situations, and you have to have 1 or 2 or more, and you can be classed as an addict. But it also describes the symptoms that you go through and what happens to you personally. You're going to take more and more in order to fend off being sick. You're going to leave your family behind. You're going to leave your work behind. You're going to leave your social relationships lagging because you have to be attending to your own symptoms, taking more and more drugs to stop the withdrawal symptoms. Nobody goes into taking drugs because they expect to have withdrawal symptoms. They expect to control them. They expect that they're going to have a handle on it. What they don't know and what they should know, and which is why I kind of pound the gavel here, is that your brain changes. You take the drugs and your brain actually physically changes, and then it becomes your taskmaster. It is no longer that pleasurable thing that gives you a few hours break from reality. It now becomes demanding. You must have it or you will be sick. And you may not even want it. And it's become awful for you, but you cannot stop it because you cannot stand the withdrawal symptoms, which can be terribly, terribly serious. So we've covered quite a bit of this. I'm going to continue with it. We're not off drugs yet. I'm going to be going into hard drugs, cocaine, heroin, what the withdrawal symptoms are. You can be addicted to them, and so therefore we will continue with this. But I'll close it for now, and we'll just continue this next time. Please join me then.